Hey folks, this is Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. Do you ever feel like state politics are hard to follow? Do you wish you could hear directly from the people making the decisions? Do you really know what your elected officials are doing, the policies they're pushing, and how those choices impact your community and your daily life? Tennessee Today is a podcast where I share an inside look at state government, what's happening, why it matters, how it affects you in your daily life. No political spin here, no confusing jargon, just real discussions about the issues shaping our state. Hello, this is Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson with another episode of Tennessee Today. And this is a really special episode. We have Congressman Chuck Fleischmann from the 3rd Congressional District, which includes Hamilton County. Chuck, I'm going to look at the official bio here, or at least part of it, and read a little bit of that for the audience, and then we'll ignore all this and move on to have a really good conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. Chuck has become I hope you don't mind me calling you Chuck.
I am Chuck.
Okay.
Remember Chuck for Congress?
I remember Chuck for Congress.
There
yes.
you go.
Chuck Locke. I can think of a lot of different Chuck things.
Up Chuck. Yeah. Well, you never know.
Chuck's well known to the 3rd District, but just the formality of making sure everybody knows who you are. He is a conservative Republican. Obviously, I've already said he represents the 3rd Congressional District. He was elected in 2010 in a heated primary, and a primary with a bunch of Republicans in it, a lot of really
11.
good people. Yeah, 11 people. His current district, because, every 10 years when the state legislature redistricts and redraws the congressional
Thank you,
line.
Senator.
You're
very
welcome.
Much.
But currently, the 3rd Congressional District consists of Anderson, Bradley, Campbell, Hamilton, McMinn, Monroe, Morgan, Polk, Roane, and Scott counties. So it's a Kentucky to Georgia line, really, right?
That's correct. 10 wonderful East Tennessee counties. We used to have 11.
Yeah, we did, and population growth. And, of course, when you first ran in 2010, your strength, and I assume you're still really strong in the northern part of the district, while you, obviously, Hamilton County's got a lot of population, all that, but you, back in 2010, coalesced all these smaller counties together and, quite honestly, surprised a lot of people with your win.
Yes, we actually won every northern county from Anderson to Roane. At that point in time, it was Union and the other northern counties. And candidly, the key to that was we were very loud on Knoxville TV. There's 2 media markets, Chattanooga and Knoxville. Knoxville is more expensive, no question. It reaches out more, but that was our strategy. Be up on TV loud and often in the north, and it worked.
Yeah. So for all those folks who live outside of Hamilton County in these other more rural counties, this is the podcast they need to listen to. So you need to promote this for me when you're out and about and when you're on your own website, because I want to be popular up there too, even though I don't represent any of those people. Oh, my podcast
Well,
to
you
be popular.
do with your role in the Senate. I mean, you are basically the Senate finance chair, right?
Well,
So you
that's
take
true.
care of the whole state. So all of those counties benefit from your great experience and generosity.
That's true. That's true. They also have the lieutenant governor in Anderson County, which, helps a little bit. But let me finish with our introduction here. He's on the Appropriations Committee. Now, I think you're the only member of the Tennessee State delegation that serves on appropriations, and that's a big deal.
1 of 9, yes.
And within the appropriations, and we'll talk a little bit about how Congress is structured as compared to the way that the state government is structured, but you're on energy, water development, and related agencies, labor, health, and human services, education, and related agencies, and that's really a big one, right?
Yes. Has all the health care.
Right. And then defense. And you also sit on the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, where you sit on the Energy Subcommittee, and that makes sense because Oak Ridge is in your House district. You're a strong advocate for business development, infrastructure, and, of course, workforce growth in East Tennessee. So welcome to Tennessee Today. This is going to be a great conversation.
I'm looking forward. Yes, sir.
All right, so let's begin. We talked a little bit about how you got elected, so we'll kind of move on from that. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between state and local government. One of the things that we try to do with this podcast is we try to to provide information that's informative and educational. And people ask me all the time how I like D.C. And I say, well, I like D.C., but I'm glad I don't have to go there very often, because people don't make the distinction between my capital, our capital being in Nashville, and then where you serve in D.C. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between the state legislature and the federal legislature. In the Tennessee Constitution, we have an executive branch, a legislative branch, House and Senate, and a Supreme Court where the justices are elected. Now, how about the federal level?
At the federal level, the president appoints. We have a 9-member United States Supreme Court. I think Tennessee's, I believe, is 5.
That's right.
And the president of the United States nominates, and the United States Senate, not the House, the United States Senate, either votes to confirm or deny.
So elected versus, although there has been discussion about people saying, maybe we ought to elect or term limit our Supreme Court justices now.
Well, that discussion is out there, but for now, and it's nowhere written in the Constitution that there's 9 members.
Right.
That has happened over time, and historically, the Supreme Court has had its ebbs and flows. There was one time earlier in our congressional history, in our country's history, that the Congress, I believe, actually suspended the Supreme Court. So it's a long history. It's a history built on tradition. There are 9 members. I live right behind the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., so I walk past there every day. Actually, the new Supreme Court that was built in 1935, the original Supreme Court is in the Capitol building.
It was in the basement.
In the
and
basement.
I think it was Justice Brandeis who opposed moving to a new facility because he thought, and Brandeis is famous for saying states are the laboratories of democracy, but Brandeis was against moving because he said, we're supposed to be sort of out of the way. We don't need a big fancy building, if I remember my judicial history.
And if you visit the Capitol, they are downstairs. You can go and visit the original Supreme Court that was there until 1935. One key thing, though, in D.C., it is a lifetime appointment. That's very important because some members stay until they're very old, very senior, and that upsets sometimes people in both sides. For example, when Justice Ginsburg passed away in office, that allowed my friend President Trump to pick somebody who was a conservative Republican justice as opposed to a liberal justice, and changes the composition of the court. Used to not be that way. When I was a younger person, politics did not matter as much with the selection of Supreme Court justices. Now it does, very much. It's a politically charged, very tense process. But the reality is, for the House, it's the spectator sport.
Yeah. So we have 99 members in our House of Representatives in the state of Tennessee, and you have
435.
And we have 33 state senators, and Congress has
100.
So and in Congress, the 100 senators, there are 2 senators
for every state. And interestingly enough, some states have only 1 member of Congress, but they'll always have 2 senators. So North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, they only have actually 1 member. Wyoming, 1 member of Congress. My friends from Montana are very happy now. They actually have 2. So it's based on population. It's redistricted every time. Tennessee has 9 members. We just missed out on 1. Next time we'll get another one. That's right now I've got over 800,000 constituents due to the fact that we missed a congressional seat by about 100,000 people. Next time we're going to have a 10th seat.
Did I mention that your district is drawn by the members of the state legislature? Have I mentioned that powerful position?
And often, and I thank you. I mean, really, Bo, that is something of major consequence because I represent all of Hamilton County, which has Chattanooga, all of Bradley County now, and you all gave us back Bradley County. That's been historically split, even before me, before my time, between the 3rd and 2nd districts. Now it's all there, and the people of Bradley County really appreciate what you did, putting all of that in the 3rd district.
Now, a big difference between the state legislature and the federal legislature that is commonly called Congress, the difference between the two, or a big difference between them, is you guys meet year-round.
Yes.
And this is, for all intensive purposes, this is what you do for a living. And those of us in state government, at least in Tennessee, now every state's different, but most states are quasi part-time positions. We meet from usually the second Tuesday in January. We have to come in then. The Constitution requires it until about the end of April, first part of May. We also are limited to only 90 days over the 2-year cycle. So now your cycles are 2-year cycles as well, but our legislative cycles only last for 2 years. So in that 2-year time, we can only meet for 90 days. Actually, what it says, Chuck, is we can only meet for 90 days. We can meet for more. We just don't get paid after 90 days.
I
So
see.
most members don't want to work for free, even though we kind of work for free anyway. But after 90 days, the legislature would usually adjourn. But y'all meet year round. So for people to understand the difference between the two, I know when I'm out, like I'm out right now, we've recessed until January. I spend a lot of time in the district meeting, going to meetings.
You always
doing things.
have. Even before I was in Congress, you were always out. You were omnipresent everywhere in the district. I would go somewhere, there was Bo Watson. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and people probably thought, what does this guy do for a living? He's always shows up he's always showing up at these meetings. But so how does y'all's year work? You have scheduled breaks though during Scott,
Sure.
right?
Constitutionally, we have to be sworn in every 2 years. I believe that's either January 3rd or 4th. And there is a schedule that is actually put out by whomever the majority leader is. In this case, the Republicans have a majority in the House, albeit a very slim one. A few months ago, it was one. Now it's up to about 3 or 4 members. But our majority leader sets a schedule for the entire legislative year. Our friends,
Do y'all vote on? That's curious, and I'm going to interrupt you here along the way because I
Please.
find that interesting.
Sure.
The compare and contrast between the way our bodies function. Does your body approve that schedule, or is that just a responsibility that the leader has?
It's a responsibility of the majority leader to set the calendar. Now, the majority leader will usually check with members of the majority and the minority and probably confer with the United States Senate. For example, this week, the United States Senate is in, we're out. Sometimes we're both in, sometimes we're in and they're out. For this legislative session, the House and the Senate are in a record number of days, a lot of time. That was the majority leader and the Senate majority leader's decision to do that. They felt that we needed to be in more days than not. So what does that mean? That means we're in voting on more things, working on legislation up there, as opposed to being in our district.
Okay, so in our legislature in Tennessee, we have like a floor session on Monday where we're actually on the Senate floor, actually voting final passage on bills. And then usually Tuesday and Wednesdays are committee days. So they're not floor days. We're not on the floor, we're not in the chambers. And then Thursday, we usually have another session on the floor. So we have kind of 2 scheduled committee days. Are y'all set up the same way? Do y'all have specific days for committee meetings and then your no floor sessions, or are floor sessions scheduled as they're needed?
In the House, we vote every day. Even on a fly-in date, we'll have what we call suspension votes, which require 2/3 majority. But usually, those are things that you'll have a 430 to 5 vote, or sometimes all 435 will be for the suspensions. It might be naming a bridge, a post office, something that's non-controversial to get everybody there to convene. We have more things akin to seasons. For example, right now we are in appropriation season, and I'm an appropriator.
Appropriations is the spending, right? How you're going to spend money.
The Appropriations Committee arguably is probably one of the most powerful committees in Congress because we decide where we spend the federal dollars, where we allocate those federal dollars, whether that's for defense, for education, healthcare, you name it. I sit on 3 subcommittees. I chair energy and water. I'm actually the country's energy congressperson. I mean, that's what I do. I have a focus on nuclear, but the reality is I'm about energy, and more energy, even though I chair energy and water. Having said that, we have a season. People who are not appropriators, and that's everybody else, we call those people authorizers. So our friends on Ways and Means, our friends on Energy and Commerce, our friends on financial services, transportation, pick that. They have a season pretty much all year where they are writing or what we call marking up bills. For us, we will be marking up our 12 appropriation bills usually from March through about the end of June. This time we're going to have to go into July because we had a later start. We had to wait on the new president's budget to see what they were doing.
So markup, because that's a term that people will hear.
Yes.
And not really, they'll think
Write a
about
bill.
correcting. Yeah, you're basically, that's where you're writing the legislation. Now, in our process, once a piece of legislation gets written, it gets introduced, our Constitution requires that that legislation have 3 public readings. So the first 2 are more ceremonial, actually date back to the old days when before we had any kind of communication system, the early, late 1700s, early 1800s, when the clerk would actually get up on the floor and read the bill to everybody in the audience, and then have to get up the next day and read the bill, and that was the first 2 readings. And then if there was a committee, it went to committee, and then the final vote is obviously the 3rd reading. Do y'all have that same kind of process? Do y'all have a requirement for reading a bill 2 or 3 times?
We don't. What will happen, I will write the energy and water bill for the United States House through the Appropriations Committee. When that bill is passed, it will be published. We will either pass it, and we will, in our subcommittee, because my subcommittee has more Republicans than Democrats. So sadly, every Republican will vote for it, every Democrat against it, whether they like it or not. Then it will go to full committee for what we call markup. It will pass out of full committee, and then ultimately may or may not go to the floor.
Now, can the full committee, when it comes out of your committee and goes to the full committee, can the full committee amend the bill at that point?
Absolutely. Open amendments. Republicans and Democrats can file amendments, and then as chairman, I will stand up and say, I support this or I do not.
But do you vote on every amendment?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because same process for us. I think for the audience, one distinction to make that you've made between our federal legislature, our state legislature, and our local legislature. Actually, our local legislature has to have 2 readings of anything before they can move forward with it, right? So when the county commission is considering an ordinance or the city council is considering a new law for the city, that they have to have 2 public readings before they can even start any action on it.
A slight caveat to that. There is a manager's amendment where Republicans and Democrats, if they're in agreement, can put something in there, and then you vote on the manager's amendment almost in block where you put the things are that there's agreement in. So even though Democrats will not vote for the final bill, they will be able to put some things in the bill that they agree with Republicans on, and that is a manager's amendment at the beginning. But any member can have the right to be heard. That could be a voice vote, or they have a right to actually have a roll call vote in committee. And we've done that so far this year in defense and on Milcon VA. We will do that on my energy and water bill in early July.
Okay. So for at least up to that point, the processes are fairly similar. Now, when you go up and y'all are on the floor to have a vote, of course, y'all do it a lot. Again, a big difference is y'all have a time frame for a vote, and y'all vote of what that time frame will be, or does the leader set that time? For example, you have, House Bill 123, and you have 1 hour to vote on House Bill 123. Who determines that 1 hour?
Well, several people. First of all, the majority leader decides what bills will and come to the floor or not on that particular day or that particular week.
Only the majority leader.
The majority leader. Now, obviously, the speaker and the committee chairs will be in consultation with them, but I've had situations before where I had a bill, for example, my Tennessee bill to return 76 acres to our wonderful Native American Cherokees, and I said, is it going to be up this week? No, Chuck, it's going to be up in 3 weeks. And the
Do they have to? Does every bill have to get a hearing or get be brought forward, or can the leader hold a bill and prevent it from coming to the floor?
It can. You can keep a bill from coming to the floor. Now, there is a way to force a bill to the floor with what's called a discharge petition. It's rarely used, but if there is something that they don't want on the floor,
so the speaker, in a different way, but the speaker holds a lot of power in the federal legislature.
Yes, very much so.
He or she can determine what bills actually go to the floor and what bills don't. Whereas in our system, we have actually a calendar committee that sets the calendar, and the speaker, and we're a very committee-driven system, and obviously the speaker of the House or the Senate can have input, but if a member gets a bill out of committee, and it gets to the calendar committee, it's coming to the floor. So that's a big difference between the group having a little bit more power at the federal legislative level and an individual having more power at the federal level.
We have a very powerful intermediary in the process. It's called the Rules Committee. So when a bill, even an appropriation bill, comes to the Rules Committee, the Rules Committee is called colloquially the Speaker's Committee.
You've got these D.C. with colloquially. That's
Yes.
strong.
Oh,
buddy. That's
yes,
strong.
indeed. So the Speaker's Committee, the Rules Committee, will actually be, I want to say in many ways, a filter. That bill will come there. They can actually change the bill and the like, and then they will determine what amendments to that bill are germane, relevant, or not. So it's a very tight process. Obviously, there are, I think, about 13 Republicans and 5 Dems on the Rules Committee right now. I may be a little bit off, but you can see how that's going to go. The majority party in the House, unlike the Senate, you always want to be in the majority, but the majority party in the House is so critically important.
Well, that's why winning in elections,
Gosh, yes.
and winning the majority is so critical to being able to move an agenda forward at the federal level and state level too. I mean, if I've served in both, and so have you. I've been in the minority, I've been in the majority, and it is no fun to be in the minority because you only get to do what the majority allows you to do. That's just the way the system works.
You're so right. And you're so privileged in the House and Senate in Tennessee to have super majorities, which is incredible. In the House, we have a majority of about 3 or 4, which is very difficult, but it is a numbers game. The United States Senate is a very different body. Originally a body that was set up that was not popularly elected. Now it is. We've amended our Constitution, but they've kept rules in place to make sure that it's somewhat of a buffer. So the power of one senator to keep a bill from coming to the floor in the majority or the minority is very, very powerful. The power of a senator not to have something come up for a vote, very important. They can hold a vote. In the House, and I was one of 4 Republicans in the entire last Congress not to miss a single vote. I have one of the highest attendance records. But if I can't get in, if my plane is late or whatever, they will vote without me unless they need my vote. The reality is a senator can hold that until he or she gets there.
And for those who may not keep up with constitutional amendment history, it was the 17th Amendment that gave popular election to the United States Senate. Before that, the, again, state legislature of each state was responsible for electing the United States Senator. And oftentimes, particularly in Tennessee, oftentimes it was a former governor who ultimately became the United States Senator and served. So, and some would argue that pre-17th Amendment was maybe a better way to have it set up because the Senate represented the state as an entity back in the early days, whereas the congressional member represented the people. Now that both chambers are essentially elected by the same people, one just a statewide election, the other by district, you really have lost a little bit of the insulation that U.S. senators used to have from public criticism. So they could make some harder votes because of the impact on the state rather than the individual citizen. And so it sort of changed the dynamics. But that all came out of the populist movement of the early 1900s and all that stuff.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Senate was designed by our founding fathers to be a buffer. The House elected every 2 years. The Senate, at that point in time, appointed, now elected every 6 years. However, I will say this. We're still seeing some of the effects of that difference between those two branches. For example, if there is a vacancy in the United States House, there must be constitutionally a special election. If there is a vacancy in the United States Senate, because of its original creation, there will be an appointment by the governor of that state to the United States Senate for a period not to exceed 2 years. So very different dynamics there. And the rules of the Senate, particularly the filibuster. Why is the filibuster there? To make sure that the Senate does not become a 100 version person of the House. They want to slow down the process, be more methodical. The House moves rapidly. The Senate typically much more
So if
slowly.
anybody's seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, he does a filibuster.
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart. They don't really do those anymore. They use a filibuster by rule, although every cycle there is some suggestion of maybe we need to do away with the filibuster rule and et cetera, et cetera. But exactly what is a filibuster and how is that created and what makes it go away?
Well, the filibuster is a rule of the United States Senate. The House does not technically have a filibuster. There's something in the House called a magic minute that anybody in the leadership, the Speaker of the House or either majority leader, can talk indefinitely. They can go on and on and on without a time limitation. That's why they call it a magic minute in the House. But the filibuster is something that a senator can continue. It's a delay tactic that they can engage in the Senate. Now, in the last administration, there was a push, and I was against this, to do away with the filibuster. Remember, the filibuster is a rule of the Senate. It is not a constitutional fixture. So they have the right in the Senate to change the rules as we do in the House. And fortunately, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who are Democrats, said we need to keep this because we need to keep that structure involved and in place. Interestingly enough, a lot of those Democrats who wanted to vacate the filibuster now are the biggest supporters of the filibuster now that we have 53 in the Senate.
Whereas my father would say, where one stands depends on where one sits.
Indeed. Well said. So the reality is it takes 60 votes to get to what we call cloture to bring most things in the Senate to a vote. That's a very high threshold. So we have 53. That means we need 7 Democrats to join us before most things come to a vote.
But back in the early days, a filibuster was really where someone took the floor in the Senate and they stood on the floor and talked for as long as they could possibly talk, or in parliamentary terms, until they gave up the floor.
Yes.
Which could be given up, and then the members from the opposition would come in and try and figure out different ways to get them to give up the floor. You could answer questions, but if you change the conversation, all of a sudden you've given up the floor and the filibuster was ended. But there are historic stories of members who got up and talked for 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever. But inevitably, eventually a person can't talk forever, although listening to me talk, you would think that a person might be able to talk forever. But the filibuster is really a parliamentary tactic that is designed to slow down the movement of a piece of legislation.
That is correct, and exclusive to the United States Senate.
I did want to ask you before we move on to talk a little bit about the executive branch and then also talk about some specific legislation. So when I come in for a vote, I'll have, depending upon where we are in the legislative cycle, so towards the end of our session, I'll have anywhere from 30 to 60 bills on our calendar. And we will, on that floor session, spend all our time working through 30 to 60 bills. When y'all go in for a floor vote, do y'all have a number of bills on your calendar, or is it just one bill?
Usually 2 or 3. On a fly-in day when we're doing those suspension votes, and those are votes that require a 2/3 majority to pass, the reality is most of them pass, sometimes unanimously, sometimes with 1 or 2 dissenters, very non-controversial bills. On a fly-in day, typically 2 or 3 votes, be rare to have 4. During the week, when it's more substantive, we might vote 2 or 3 times a day. Typically in those vote sessions, maybe 2 or 3 votes in that session, unless we have amendments to a major bill. And when we do have amendments, it's not uncommon to have 20 or 30 amendments that we will vote on. And some are voice voted, but if somebody desires a roll call vote, they can get it.
Now, one of the big difference, I think, optically, when we are voting, everyone has to be at their desk. So if you were to look at a video of the Tennessee Senate when we're voting on legislation, everyone is at their desk or moving around. They have to be in the chamber. Y'all are a little bit different, right? I mean, you look, if you watch y'all on TV, you'll see people come in and go out and come in and go out. Even in debate, you'll have maybe 2 or 4, 6 people that are sitting up front debating, but you don't have the full chamber. Are there times with legislation where on a legislative vote that you have all of the members of the body in there voting beyond just the State of the Union address where everybody comes in?
Well, everyone has to be present to vote. We no longer have proxy voting. We had that during COVID.
But present doesn't mean present in the chamber. It
Well,
means
you come in and you vote, but then you can leave
Right,
and then
okay.
come back. So when we're on the floor, let's say there's a vote. We have 15 minutes to get to a vote. Usually they'll keep that first vote open a half hour so that we can get everyone there. And then if there are votes after that, we have the freedom to go out of the chamber anywhere we want as long as we come back and vote. But I can't let somebody else vote for me. So if there's a second vote, now some people miss votes, and sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. But the media, our friends in the press, are literally outside the chamber in what we call the speaker's lobby. So I know if I'm on the floor voting, if I walk out into that lobby, there's a very good chance that 2 or 3 journalists will get a hold of me and ask me questions, typically about appropriations, sometimes about other things from all the news outlets, and then I would go back in. So there's ingress and egress. You go back and forth, but we do have to be present to vote.
Yeah, but present is you check in.
Yes.
Front. Whereas for us, present is I can actually,
Yes.
I'm sitting there listening to the video. All right, last thing on the legislative side of the equation, then we'll talk a little bit about the executive branch. Another huge difference between the federal legislature and the state legislature in Tennessee. We can override a governor's veto with a simple majority.
Wow.
A lot
That
of
is
people don't
amazing.
realize that. That means all of the power rests in the legislature. Because obviously, if a bill's already passed, it had a simple majority, and it goes to the governor, and if the governor vetoes it, the likelihood that veto will stand is pretty small because we've already passed the bill. Whereas in your case, to override a presidential veto would require 2/3.
Yes.
And in
each body.
each body, and that's true for us too. It's a simple majority in each body. But when you have slim majorities like y'all have, all of a sudden the power is really shifted to the executive branch because the executive can override, and the chances that you can get a 2/3 are pretty small.
That's absolutely right. So when there's an executive veto, whether it's a Republican or Democratic president, it's very, very hard to override a veto. It has happened, but it's rare.
This is why Thomas Jefferson said at the time that the Tennessee state constitution was the best constitution that had been written. Of course, it was only the 16th or 17th one, so there were a lot to come after it. But Jefferson, as I know you know, was very much a proponent and an advocate for the legislative side of government because he thought that best represented the country and the people, and he was for a very weak executive. In the current federal system, the executive branch has become really, really powerful. And part of it is because of the smaller majority. Part of it is because of the way y'all exercise rules and exercise the way legislation gets passed.
You're so right. Over time, historically, we talked earlier about the Supreme Court. We talked about the legislature, the House and the Senate, and the executive branch of presidency. Since the New Deal, since FDR, we have seen an unprecedented growth in the strength and size of the executive branch, whether it was Republican or Democratic. What that meant and what that means is we've seen federal agencies actually grow to where sometimes they have their own court system, sometimes they have very large budgets, and they do a lot more in terms of rulemaking that I believe Congress really should be doing, and most Americans believe that. Now, that may change. There was a case before the United States Supreme Court dealing with what we call the Chevron doctrine, which was in the last term, I believe, or maybe the term before, which basically said it's going to curtail the strength of the executive branch, the presidency, and these executive agencies, whether that's the IRS, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy. Pick your agency to basically say, wait a second, we need to restore that inherent authority back with the legislative branch. And I believe in that. I believe in constitutional oversight, so important. So that may be changing, but the reality is, no question, the executive branch, which originally constitutionally was going to be limited with much more power in the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, has changed. The Supreme Court, again, has ebbed and flowed over its history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was not getting his New Deal passed. He threatened the court. He said, I'll pack the court with 15. And basically what happened was one justice flipped and started basically saying your New Deal policies are constitutional. I believe in keeping the Supreme Court at 9. I don't believe in packing the court from either way. We went through that debate during the last Biden administration.
But that is a big distinction between how our two governments operate. In that, and of course, in other states, they require a supermajority to override a governor's veto, and in those cases, one would argue that the executive branch has a little bit more power than the legislative. But in Tennessee, the legislature, whatever the occasion might be, the legislature has really the lion's share of the power. All right, let's talk about the executive branch. You and President Trump, y'all are good buddies and that kind of stuff. Y'all see each other quite regularly. You talk to him a lot, particularly now you're talking to him, I guess, a whole lot with TVA and the seats being open and that kind of stuff. So you've now had the opportunity, I guess, to serve with 3 presidents. You served with President Obama in his first term, correct? And then you served with Trump 1, and then you served with Biden, and then you're serving with Trump 2. People would say that Trump is acting too much like a chief executive officer, authoritarian, that kind of stuff. But you have a firsthand view of that. What's your thought about that?
He loves this country. He loves the people of this country. And I was with President Trump at the White House Thursday. And from the top of the White House before he walked down to see us, he was saying, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if Republicans and Democrats could get along, even if it was for an hour or two? He definitely believes in trying to bring people together. And I think that has lost a lot of time, sometimes because of the rhetoric and the polarized situation in Washington.
Did you ever get invited to the White House during the Obama administration?
I did. Well, we have, I was a freshman, and actually I was standing next to the picture of George Washington that Dolly Madison saved when the British were in the White House, and President Obama, who was always very nice to me. We disagreed politically, but he's very, very kind to me. I was worried that I had enough to eat. I guess I'm a little bit shorter in stature, and he'd say, are we feeding you enough, Congressman? But he talked about that picture that you're standing right next to is the one that Dolly Madison saved when the British burned the White House. Yes, I didn't have a lot of conversations with President Obama, but they were very cordial. The saddest conversation I had with him was when he actually had the courage to come into the Republican conference. There wasn't a Democrat in the room. Speaker Boehner was there. He was there. We were there. And we asked him to possibly go big on mandatory spending to try to get a balanced budget. And sadly,
so was that? Did he come to Capitol Hill for that?
Yes, he did. He came.
So I think for many, for many in the audience listening, they might not understand how significant that is, because presidents do not, quote, lower themselves, end quote, to come to Capitol Hill if it's not for their agenda. For example, the State of the Union address. It's their agenda. It's their audience. They're going to show up.
By invite of the speaker.
Right.
But he came in at the invitation of Boehner to talk with us, and give him credit for that. Because remember, there wasn't a Democrat in that room. And Boehner came to him and said, look, let's go big. Let's come up with the deal. And he said, Mr. President, I promise you, the final bill will not look like what you want it to look like or what I want it to look like, or what these folks or what your folks. But if we could put something together to deal with the deficit, we were $15 trillion in debt then. Now we're $34 trillion in debt. And I can remember President Obama in that room looking down and looking at us and said, I'm not concerned with the deficit. And that was a big, big sadness, because we could have gone big.
Yeah. So let's go back to President Trump. So
yes.
He comes out of he's from the business world, so he's used to sort of executive decision making ability. What reason would the president have for inviting congressional members to the White House?
Well, this instance, it was the White House congressional picnic. Sometimes it's a party. Sometimes it's an event where you're bringing in a foreign dignitary. And sometimes it's to talk about pending legislation. For example, when President Trump came into our conference about a month ago and visited with me and others, he basically was talking about the one big, beautiful bill. We had yet to vote on that. And I was talking with the president about that. And I said, Mr. President, I'm going to vote for the bill. You don't have to worry about that. I want to talk with you about what's going on at TVA. It is very important. And he said, absolutely, Chuck. I will talk with you about that. And he has. But the reality is, it just depends on the circumstances. It might be a national situation. It might be legislation. It might be a public gala. So you'd be invited down there. But he's very accessible. What you see is what you get. How he feels, whether it's at Mar-a-Lago, and I've been with him in his office at Mar-a-Lago, in the U.S. Capitol, at the White House, in the Oval Office, he will always speak his mind.
And he has a good relationship with the Tennessee delegation at large, right?
Yes, very much.
I mean,
so.
most of our members have a good working relationship with the president,
Yes.
right?
It's 8-1 Republican.
Yeah,
yes.
and that makes a big difference.
It
right?
does.
I mean, that helps in so many different ways. Okay, as we talk about differences, let's talk about perhaps one of the biggest differences, if not the biggest difference, between our two legislatures, or the state of Tennessee and the United States of America. In the state of Tennessee, we are constitutionally required.
I knew this was coming.
You knew it.
Kudos to our great state. And it's great to be a Tennessean, right?
Yeah, that's
Tell
right.
us
It
why.
is absolutely great. But we are constitutional, and many of the states are as well, but we are constitutionally required to pass a balanced budget. As a matter of fact, in our Constitution, it is the only bill that the legislature has to pass. We pass a lot of other bills, 800 or so of them, but this is the only one that we actually really have to pass. So we have to have a new budget every year. The federal government doesn't work that way.
That's correct.
And many would argue we can't remember the last time they passed a, quote, budget, but let alone we know
Under the Clinton administration.
Yeah, well, a balanced one, certainly under the Clinton administration. You use other types of funding mechanisms to continue to fund the government. But tell me your thoughts on the realities of a balanced budget at a federal level. And because, I mean, you are in the thick of it. I mean, by your position, you're one of the cardinals. How many cardinals are there? 7? 12 cardinals. You and I talk this language because we live this life, but what is a cardinal and how does one become a cardinal?
Cardinal is a D.C. dialect term for a subcommittee chair on the powerful House Appropriations Committee. There are 12 subcommittees on the full Appropriations Committee. I am one of the 12. I chair the Energy and Water Subcommittee of Appropriation, but there'll be a cardinal or a subcommittee chair for Housing and Urban Development. There'll be a subcommittee chair for Defense. There'll be a subcommittee chair for any of the 12.
And you construct the budget or appropriations for that area of jurisdiction of the subcommittee that you have responsibility for. And so essentially there are like 12 different proposals that have to come together to create the federal budget. And I know this year y'all got to 10 of them. You didn't get all of them.
No,
done.
that's right. We had about 7, I think.
7.
But remember, because of the continuing resolution, they all failed. That's what happened. So if you get into a continuing resolution as opposed to that, now in 2024, we actually passed a federal budget. The key is get those 12 bills passed. I sit on 3 subcommittees. I've got the best hand of anybody in Congress because I've got Defense Appropriations, Labor, Education, Health and Human Services, and I chair Energy and Water. But there are 12 of these. Ideally, you pass all 12 bills out of full committee on the floor. You conference them with the Senate, and then the president signs it into law.
This is why for the listeners, this is why understanding how the process works is just as important as the policy itself, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you don't understand how the process works, even with the best policy, your policy gets lost in the process. So you have to understand how it works. That's a great explanation of what the Cardinals are. Now, when you look at and you hear conversation about balancing the federal budget, what's the realistic thoughts about that?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you. It's the honor of my life to be a Tennessean. I love our great state. I love our Constitution. I love the way that we're set up. Our constitutional offices I love the Tennessee Constitution, and thank you for that. On a balanced budget amendment years ago, and again, another sadness, there was a tie vote whether or not to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, and Al Gore voted against it. Okay, if he had voted yes, we would have been in a much better position, but he voted no.
Al Gore the younger or Al Gore the older?
The vice president, okay, because he broke the tie vote in the United States Senate. Another disappointment for someone who I think had a very disappointing political career and who could have been great, but sadly not. Having said that, the federal government has certain obligations that the state government does not have. In 1980, my good friend Hal Rogers went to Congress. At that time, 20% of the budget was mandatory, 80% was discretionary.
Now, this for the podcast listeners.
Yes,
this is a really key part about the federal budget that, folks, if you're kind of loosely listening or you're listening to this podcast to go to sleep at night, perk up your ears a little bit and listen, because this is actually a key component to the challenge that we have in our federal budgeting system.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Chuck.
And the most important thing that we can discuss about today, and I think as a nation. Okay, so at that point in time, because of our age as a country and with people older and younger, it was almost an 80-20 one way. Now, mandatory spending, and I'm going to define that in a second, is about 76% of our budget, and the rest is discretionary. When we talk about me being on the powerful House Appropriations Committee, I'm only appropriating for about 25 or 26% of the federal budget.
So let's take a second and just tease out a little bit on the mandatory side of it. Those increases in spending on the mandatory and the big three, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid.
Interest on the national debt.
Interest on the debt. Those, ironically, defense is not a mandatory spend.
That's correct. It's discretionary. That's right.
Even though that's the number one responsibility that the federal government has, is to protect us. But anyway, besides
that. It's the number one expenditure of appropriations. About half of all of our discretionary spending is on defense, and I sit on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. So
those increases in spending in those programs, in the mandatory programs, they're going to occur regardless. I mean, they just are automatically hardwired into the system. So in reality, you have very limited control of the overall budget, because you can't get to $34 trillion in reductions by only having influence on 26% of the budget.
Absolutely right. As a matter of fact, since my time in Congress, in terms of percentage of GDP, discretionary spending has gone down, where mandatory spending has gone up. Now, mandatory, why is it going up? We're an aging group. I'm 62. I'm at the end of the baby boomers. But for the next 5 years, we're going to have a lot more people my age going on the rolls of Social Security and Medicare every day, about 10,000 a day. So eventually the numbers will correct themselves. But for the past 15, 20 years, we've seen more people going on the rolls of Social Security, Medicare, people on Medicaid, of course, interest on the national debt. When you're $34 trillion in debt and you're borrowing, that's a lot of money. So these things have to be done. Now, Congress plays a game sometimes. When they want something to last, they will pass a bill and they will tuck it on the side of mandatory spending. So some programs that you wouldn't expect to be on the mandatory side, they tuck in there. Why? They don't want it to be subject to the whims of annual appropriations, so it automatically recurs. But every time you do that, you raise mandatory spending or that percentage. So we are appropriating literally for 25 to 26%. And over time, as mandatory grows, and it will grow, we're going to get squeezed on the discretionary side.
Yeah, so growth in the economy is a critical factor in our ability to fund, particularly on the mandatory side, all of the things that we have to fund in federal government.
Absolutely. It's essential.
And so part of the strategy of tax reduction is that actually by reducing taxes, you actually generate more revenue because the economy gets more accelerated. And by producing more revenue, your GDP goes up, and et cetera, and all of a sudden you have better resources to fund those things, particularly those things on the mandatory side.
we have got to grow the economy, and I have a lot of differences and disagreements with our friends on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats. But one of the things that I get very upset, do not divide us on our ability to earn. Okay, if somebody in America wants to go out and earn more money, even with lower tax rates, if they earn more money, the Treasury will get more revenue. It's very simple that way. And that's just not Ronald Reagan or Dr. Laffer talking about that, or Donald Trump. That's Jack Kennedy. If you watch President Kennedy talk about that, that used to be one of his fundamental tenets, and he was a Democrat. But right now, the Democratic Party sadly wants to tax people who work harder and make more money. And I think that is so wrong, because people who've already accumulated wealth have wealth. It's those people who are coming up in the system, like myself. When I came to Chattanooga in 1986 and started a small law firm, I was very fortunate, but I worked hard, played by the rules, paid my taxes. But having lower taxes allowed me as a small family and a small business to keep more of my revenue, to help my family, to help my community. And that's what I really want to see happen in America. We will have much more revenue. You hit right on the spot. If we have growth, we will have more money come into the Treasury, and we will not divide people. I think we're overtaxed, not undertaxed, but that's where the debate is right now in America.
But to balance to truly balance the federal budget is a really heavy lift. I mean, a really heavy lift because of
mandatory spending
towards mandatory spending and the lack of political will, or the unwillingness, or the difficulty in addressing those big four programs. Of course, you got to pay
on both sides.
On both sides of the
yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly we can understand that. Those of us in the elected space, we can understand those are important programs for people, particularly older people. And so it makes balancing the budget, or even making spending reductions, even more difficult. Now, you can reduce the growth in spending, which is, I think, what most of y'all's strategy has been, is we're still going to spend more. We're just going to spend less of more than we might have otherwise, right? I mean, is that a fair? So, and I know this past Friday, you just cast a really important vote that probably went unnoticed by most people, unless you're on the finance side, and that is y'all clawed back, or you voted on a rescission bill that I think restored about, clawed back about $9 billion, $9 or $10 billion from different programs out there. Of course, that's got to go to the Senate, where it kind of goes through the whole washing machine effect to see if you can get it done or not.
Yes.
But those are hard decisions. I appreciate you making it. But those are hard decisions that when you have 435 members, you're trying to coalesce around a decision, it can be really difficult. And so the last few bills y'all have passed, whether it's the reconciliation bill or the rescission bill, it's had a 1 or 2 vote margin, with the opposition party voting no on both of them, right?
That is correct. There was a time where Republicans and Democrats could work together, and you'd see bills, whether they were appropriation bills or other bills. But right now, it's very clear. The Democrats have told us no help. That means no votes on any major pieces of legislation. They're a very disciplined party. I think they're wrong, but they are disciplined. They're more disciplined than we are. I can see that in the way that they whip their members and how they handle things. And with our conference, with our very small majority in the House, you can only lose a few. In the Senate, we have 53, but you need 60 for a filibuster. Now, reconciliation, that's talked about an awful lot. They can use it basically one time each year. That requires just a majority. But the reality is, it's tough to get, when you have to get to 60 votes, get to 60 votes. We talked about TVA. When I've spoken with the administration about that, I'd like to see non-Republicans on the TVA board. I'm not going to get that, because Senator Schumer's not going to let it get to a vote in the Senate unless he gets some type of a compromise. Thank goodness Senator Haggerty is astutely and acutely aware of that, as is Senator Blackburn. They're talking with the president about that. What does that look like? We've got to get a quorum at TVA, but it's going to take a deal to get to 60 votes.
Yeah, we'll bring you back at some point in the future and talk a little bit about energy, because energy is a major economic and community development
that's what I do
factor.
in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize how much the energy grid is a critical component of our overall economic development. But, I really appreciate out of this administration, when we say administration, we're usually talking about the executive branch, but also on the legislative side, you guys are pushing more things back down to the states.
Yes.
It's going to require us to make some really hard decisions financially. But I think, as long as Tennessee taxpayer dollars that go to Washington come back to Tennessee, and we can use those tax dollars in the ways that best fit Tennessee and not what fit California or New York, I think it can be a really effective and really is more of the traditional classic federalism that this country was founded on, where the states really do most of the work. The federal government has roles on, particularly international affairs, defense, and those kind of things. But the states take up a lot of the individual work back in their own locations. I really appreciate that philosophy that we've seen from this administration. I had the pleasure of meeting with Secretary Linda McMahon of Education, and we talked about that very thing of, look, if you want to get rid of the Department of Education, we're fine with that. Just make sure you send the money that we've sent up to you, send it back. Is there anything, before we close out, is there anything about the differences between our two, I'll say jobs, but our two roles that we play that I haven't touched on that you think we ought to talk about?
Well, I want to say thank you, first of all, for being fiscally responsible, and also from time to time during my 15-year tenure, we have had what we call one-time money come back to these states, including the great state of Tennessee. And due to the fact, I'll be candid, that we have Republican supermajorities, you all have used that money wisely. And what I mean by that is you've not created an entire new set of programs that would require you time and time again to fund that after those federal dollars go away. Many states, I serve with Republicans from states like California, New York, and Illinois, that will never be fiscally sound. They will always be in the red. They will never get there. And they tax and they tax and they spend and they spend, and it's a vicious cycle. In Tennessee, because of the way that we're structured and because of people like yourself and our leadership, we will never be put in that position. So as a Tennessean, I say thank you to you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and that's a long tradition of Tennessee legislatures. And Tennessee, every year we're ranked as one of the top three, usually the top, but one of the top three best fiscally managed states in the country. And of course, that means we don't spend money we don't have. We're the lowest indebted state in the nation, contrary to what Governor DeSantis might be telling the people at Florida. They're number two, we're number one. We really do live in a great state. I want to thank you for representing the 3rd District. People who don't know you don't realize, you're really a hard worker. I mean, you come to the Saudi Daisy Fire Hall breakfast and then get in your car and travel up to Oak Ridge or God knows where else you might be traveling within your district. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to thank the listeners for listening to this podcast. We've really gotten into some good conversation about state and local and federal government. We've got more important conversations ahead, so stay tuned. And if you know someone who might enjoy this episode, be sure to share it with them. I'm Tennessee State Senator Bo Watson. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.